Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. Davis, continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. One of the fun things I've been doing lately is putting together a volume with the occult editor, writer, and publisher Daniel Schulke of Three Hands Press and Zoanon Press. We've been putting together an edited collection called Daimon and Pharmacon about the connections between entheogens and the occult. And it's been a lot of fun. And one of the pieces we got was from Danny Diskin, a.k.a. Reverend Nemu, who long listeners of the show will recognize as a figure who's appeared in the past. I think we interviewed him in 2014. And he turned in a marvelously fun piece that included within it a lot of nice, juicy biographical snapshots of his salad days as a chaos magician in sort of rave-saturated early or mid-90s UK. And they were delightful forays, but I will resist going into the details, so you'll go buy the book eventually. But it did make me, it did stir up ideas and questions about that particular period of time in the history of the occult. I think he may have been a slightly later participant in that current, but it's something that I very much think of as a British current. You know, it's really Peter Carroll and other dudes starting to talk about new ways of doing magic in the late 70s. They start putting it together in various ways in Australia and different places. Different people pick up the spirit in the 1980s, so it's infused with a certain kind of, post-punk industrial grit. And that's part of the vibe. And, now chaos magic is a sort of, can be found anywhere and nowhere. It's like so many things these days. Once you get online, it's all over the place. But I realized that there are different stories of the history of chaos magic, and that I was lucky enough to actually know someone who was participating very deeply in the Bay Area in the 1990s, and for really long time listeners, like since the beginning, you might remember Joe Max, because we had Joe on the show in like 2011 talking about the Hieronymus machine and other curious occult devices, which he is both fascinated in and manufactures on occasion. And Joe is a marvelous raconteur who I first met through the open source Order of the Golden Dawn, an interesting esoteric group in the Bay Area, which is changing currently, as so many things do in this world. But I wanted to bring Joe on the show to walk a little bit down memory lane, the chaotic sewers beneath memory lane. And he thankfully agreed. So, Joe, welcome to the show.
Hi, Erik. Thank you for having me. Raconteur. I haven't been called that very often. That's a good one.
Well, you are, maybe because it's funny when I meet people who have interesting histories, I tend to ask them about the stories. And it took me a while to realize that most people don't do that. They'll meet somebody new and they'll just start chatting about whatever. But if I know that like you were whatever at some acid test, or if there was some kind of thing you were doing back in the day, I'll usually find my way to ask those questions. So I think to start out is I guess the curious one for me is when you first started to explore the occult, whether you were interested in the chaos current right from the get-go, or whether that was something you discovered a little bit down the line. And in either case, what was it about that current that jazzed you at the time?
Well, it definitely did not start out that way. My first interest in the occult probably goes back to being a teenage witch, and this is a long time ago. And we're talking the late '60s, early '70s. And this was like the first occult revival. Well, I don't know. You can't really call it the first occult revival, but it was the one in the 60s with the hippies. And me and my teenage friends fancied ourselves witches. And we didn't have much to work with at the time. I mean, we found Levy's Transcendental Magic book in the library. We found a couple of popular paperbacks by people like Sybil Leek. We basically just made it up as we went along. Now, after a while there, then I went to college. I got involved with other things. I got into music. I was part of the whole punk scene in San Francisco, and that's a whole nother set of stories I'll have to regale you with sometime. But it all kind of ties together. Chaos magic is kind of the punk rock of the occult, but then I started to get back into it. I first dipped myself back into it with goetic magic and talisman working, and then branched from there and started to get into doing Enochian work. But still, I was, felt like I was casting around trying to find something that really interested me.
Well, let me interrupt. I just want to get one little, get a bit of a connection on the punk rock thing. I mean, the San Francisco punk rock scene was, all punk scenes in the late 70s and the 80s were different. They were all regional. They all had very local characters. But partly because I live here and I know more about it, there's a certain extra character to the San Francisco or the Bay Area punk scene. And I'm particularly interested, and I've always been interested in how it related to whether it was just you and your friends or there was a wider sensibility that even though part of the punk thing was to reject a lot of hippie shit, and especially like goofy, naive hippie shit, that there was still a place for psychedelics, and there was still a place for a certain kind of whatever you want to call it, esotericism or edge experiences, limit experiences. So as someone who was there and who already had witchcraft flowing in your blood, or metaphorically at least, how was it to move through that scene with still being interested in esoterica and mysticism and altered states of consciousness, things that we don't necessarily associate directly with punk rock?
Well, the San Francisco scene was definitely its own scene in that sense. It started when punk started in San Francisco. It was like the mid to late 1976. Nobody knew who the Sex Pistols were. Okay, the closest thing to punk we really had at that time was Patti Smith and the Ramones. And if you look at those particular musical artists, you don't really look at them and see Sex Pistols. You don't see the British style of punk rock. That didn't come for another year, or at least another 6 months or so. But so San Francisco always was its own scene, and it had its own aesthetic. It had its own philosophy. A lot of the punk rockers, yes, they were putting aside all the hippy dippy stuff, but they were still, a lot of them were very politically active, and hell, there was a couple of bands that were avowed communists. And to a lot of people, that was just another way to rub it in the face of the squares. I'm going to go up on stage and play my set wearing a Soviet hammer and sickle on my T-shirt. So there was a difference here. It wasn't until several years later, or a year later, when the punk became this mass culture thing. I can almost remember when the first like television special on the phenomenon of punk rock. And here's your host, Anderson Cooper, whoever they had at the time. And then it just kind of exploded. All the suburban kids picked it up, and there they were at all the clubs that where we used to be alone and doing our own weird stuff. But honestly, I didn't really think of bringing my esoterica into it. I mean, I still kept my finger in it. I read tarot cards for friends. I, did my own little small practices. But most of the people in punk scene, they didn't really know much about that part of myself. That didn't come out until raves started happening.
Fascinating. And at that point, were you already into the chaos current?
Yes, I was at that point. That happened about 1989 was the first time that I, and I was like, that I first became aware of what chaos magic was. And it was being talked about on an old computer bulletin board system. Remember those?
I do.
It's what we had before the internet, kids. And someone mentioned chaos magic, and I said, "Oh, what's that? Invocation of Mandelbrot? Ritual fractals? What is it?" And I had some of the basic ideas explained to me, and I was told I should go find Pete Carroll's book. But I kind of put it aside for another year or so. I was distracted at the time, and but then I was unexpectedly given a copy of Carroll's book by a friend in the rave scene in San Francisco. This would have been around 1991, and then I got back into contact with the people who I chatted with on the BBS, who turned out to be members of the IoTs, the Illuminates of Thanateros, Peter Carroll's magical order. I hadn't talked to them since then because I was going through a rather sticky divorce at the time, so I was a bit distracted. In the meantime, I've been experimenting with Goetic magic and Thelema with other friends, and there was a lot of magical thinking going on in San Francisco around that time. But I did connect with these people, but by that time they had left the IoT and formed their own magical guild called the Autonomatrix.
Well, I want to stop just to hear, for a moment, to indicate to the youngins out there that one of the interesting things about the pre-web internet in this era, at least from the late 80s onward, in this world of BBSs and then eventually of mailing lists and the alt groups that were part, of the Usenet and the earlier, again, all of these kind of pre-World Wide Web internet features, platforms, technologies, is that they were full of weirdos. There was a much higher percentage of weirdos online than later on when everybody got online, and then you'd have a more conventional sort of slice of weirdos. And so it was really a place for people who are interested in esotericism and psychedelics and unconventional sexual relations and anarchism and radical politics. There was just a lot of very curious scenes there, and this is, I'm in a way a setup for what we're going to hear about the Autonomatrix, is that the very space that was opened up by the internet, the sense of an alternative way of communicating, of alternative forms of community, all the stuff that now we're completely sick of hearing hyped versions of as they suck us down the path of infinite surveillance. There was a period when that was not necessarily in the cards, or maybe if you were a total cynic, you could have said it was always in the cards or it was always inevitable. But it certainly didn't look that way. And so right? And then that actually infused the magical spirit, and that's part of what Autonomatrix was doing.
It was the underground. Literally the underground. There were no magazine articles and TV specials about what was going on. And I think it was also, it filtered out a lot of the real, let's say it filtered in highly intelligent people. You had to have a computer. You had to be at least savvy enough to know how to work it and how to run, get connected to BBS systems. It was not just for casual people. It was for the intelligentsia. So the level of learning and discussion and sharing that was going on was at a lot higher level than you see nowadays for the most part.
And then did the Autonomatrix sort of live in these networks to some degree, or was it very much a real world, face to face, get together, do stuff, or was it a mix of the two?
It was a mix of the two. We had weekly meetings. And Autonomatrix gatherings were more like literary salons. It's where a person would bring in some kind of occult or magical process or tradition or something that they had been interested in and worked something out that they could do with a group. So we were eclectic as hell. We were grabbing stuff from every place we could find, throwing it into our chaos blender and coming out with something that we worked together. But at the same time, and this is all, meat space, we were there in, getting together at least, usually there are a dozen or so of us at each of these gatherings. But we also, the Autonomatrix ran its own BBS. It was called Meat for Breakfast, and spelled MEAT. And we ran that from 1992 to maybe 1994 in the San Francisco Bay Area. So this was like before Usenet or Internet, it was before the World Wide Web. And Internet was starting to become like another door in a BBS system. Here, and you can get our local chat group, and here you can go over here and click on this, and it will take you to the Internet, which is, okay. And so it was just another option at the time. So yes, we were doing both. And that also, we were very active on another network called SFNet at the time. I don't know if you were around the Bay Area at that time or not, but this was a local BBS network. They even put kiosks in nightclubs where you could put a quarter in and log on to SFNet for X amount of minutes per quarter. It's like a vending machine.
Joe, I wanted to ask you one thing. You mentioned how eclectic you guys were in the Autonomatrix and the sort of everything goes chaos blender approach. When you first encountered the ideas of chaos magic, which is an eclectic way of approaching sorcery and magical operations, was that part of what appealed to you? Like, what was it when you sort of got the breath of the chaos vibe and finally read Peter's book and started talking more to your friends? Was it the call of the eclectic? Was it the sense that it was more current because more punk rock, less tradition bound? Like, what was it that got you jazzed?
Well, it's a combination of the, not being tradition bound, and the experimental nature of it all. And what I got out of when I read Carol's book, when I read Liber Null, what really struck me was this guy has stripped away all of the accoutrements, all of the traditions and the gods and boiled it down to just what works. And that was a very important thing to me because that's kind of a punk rock aesthetic. Let's throw away all these fancy recording studio tricks and synthesizers and all of this other big orchestral arrangements, and let's get back to 3 chords. And that, I think, is what appealed to me the most about it. It activated my punk rock sensibility again.
Yeah, it's a really interesting moment, actually, because thinking about, the way in which chaos magic does emerge from the earlier hippie occult revival. They're obviously coming out of those scenes. They enjoyed reading Crowley and all that kind of thing. And religious mysticism, or the pursuit of mystical experience, was such an important part of the hippie stuff, and it ended up making all sorts of different things happen. The magic, est, self-help, Buddhism, yoga, all this stuff kind of manifests. But very little of that other stuff survived punk rock. Like, punk rock was not interested in meditation. Punk rock was not interested in achieving oneness with the universe. But the occult stream still was part of that. That's what's so interesting about chaos magic to me. I mean, it's like it recognized that something new had happened with punk on a deep level, beyond fashion or music even. And it recognized that there was an esoteric or mystical dimension of that change that really nothing else really kind of made that. So there's something even now, to my mind, very fresh about a lot of the things you guys were up to at that point, and people still do today. I mean, it's still a living tradition. But I do want to ask you about one particular, since I'm a Lovecraft head. I do want to ask you about how the sort of Cthulhu mythos, to sort of somewhat misname it, entered into the conversations at the Autonomatrix, and when you guys started figuring out, like, well, maybe we should try stuff. Maybe we should actually try working with this. I'd love to hear how that unfolded.
Okay, the first inspiration, I think, and I kind of almost remember when this happened, was a fellow that, I'll give the magical name we used for him, which was Fire Clown. And he's still around. He's making esoteric jewelry. But this fellow, he brought in a Xerox copy of Phil Hines' Pseudonomicon. And this was Chaos Magic author Phil Hines' take on doing Lovecraftian magic. And we looked at that and went, ooh, yeah. Now, here's something edgy and cool. I remember just a passage sticks out in my mind in that book is like Phil asking the question, why would anyone want to invoke beings that could rip your face off?
It's a good question.
That was punk rock. That was it. We did do quite a bit of Lovecraftian work, especially with one of the working groups in the Autonomatrix, which was called the Temple Anakai.
And then, what can you talk about any of the workings? What would you relate about what the most successful? Or before we go into the nitty gritty, if we can go into the nitty gritty, let's go a little more into. So, from the outside, the attraction to the left hand pass, to working with demons, to invoking, beings that want to rip your face off. It sort of goes against the grain of most people's inclinations. There's a subset of people who are attracted to that, who actually kind of want to be, for lack of a better term, evil. Like they're into, the whole vibe of kind of hate, or they're into the negative, but like fully, like they identify with it. But there's this whole other world that I associate more with chaos magic and with certain aspects of the OTO, and where it's just more complicated than that. It's not right to say there's a lot of magicians who are interested in invoking or working with or playing on the edge of these dark possibilities, but they're not doing it because they just want to be evil, but from the outside it's really unclear. So I'm curious how you describe, whether it's just out of punk rock impetuousness and hell, let's caution be damned, safety third, plunge into the unexpected, or other kinds of reasons. Like, what was it about the idea of invoking beings, fictional beings that might want to rip your face off? What was attractive about that? What made that interesting? What made that seem valuable to you?
We were looking for intensity. If you went to any, a Wiccan coven or an OTO, an OTO meeting, gathering, it's like going to church. Oh, they have all these lines they're going to recite, and they're going to say this and that, and you're supposed to womp yourself up into a Gnostic state so that you can appreciate the magicality of it all. And there's certainly a place for that. But that's not what we were looking for. We were looking for excitement. We were looking for intensity. We were looking for something that would put our weird shit-o-meters into the red zone. Because that was what magic meant to us. And that was the same kind of... So we weren't looking for evil. Good and evil really weren't even part of the equation. We were looking for intensity, just like punk rock was. A lot of people, punk rockers, they're violent and evil, and they jump around and spit on each other, and there must be horrible, evil people. No, we were just looking for the intensity. We wanted to live, and that was what the inspiration for us was.
Yeah, that's a fine answer. So, tell me about like some of the. I know that you did dream work surrounding the the Cthulhu workings, to call them that, and
Mhm.
that's a very interesting thing. Because of course, when you get into the whole issue of like, well, these things are just fictions. Lovecraft made them up, and you're like, well, kind of. Lovecraft had a pretty weird dream life, and actually, some of the
Yeah.
stories come from his dreams, and some of the names and Necronomicon
Hmm.
comes from a dream. Nyarlathotep comes from a dream. And you're like,
Hmm.
oh, well, okay, that
Tell you about
shifts
the
it a little
dreamland.
bit, but it certainly opens up the dreaming as part of the domain of the exploration of this particular facet of weirdness.
Well, one of the working groups, like I mentioned, was the Axe was Temple Anakai, and our focus was doing experiments with Lovecraftian mythos. So we had come up with a ritual called the Gate of Shub-Niggurath, and the idea was to open a portal to the dreamlands, like Lovecraft's Randolph Carter character. The idea, the practical idea originally was to try to link ourselves telepathically so that we could share a common dream. That was the goal. Now, it worked, but not in the way we thought it would. Because instead of sharing a dream, over the next few days after that ritual, we all dreamed what seemed to be in a common setting, but each of us dreamt a different part of the story. When we compared our notes, we realized that we could string the scenes together into a logical sequence. We didn't appear in each other's dreams. We were like the common character passed to each, like an avatar, handed over to each person for the next part of the story.
Were some of the
So,
settings the same? Like that there was that
oh
some of
yeah,
the
oh yes, oh yes. My dream seemed to be the beginning when we worked it all out, and which I was walking through a windswept, flat desert of gray sand, and what looked to be like a sandstone roundhouse in the middle of it. There was nothing else as far as the eye could see, and it seemed like I'd wandered around. There was, now that I think about it, there may have been mountains in the distance. So now, looking back on it, it's almost like the playa at Burning Man, which I knew nothing about. It was 1993 or 94. Anyway, there's inside that roundhouse was a spiral staircase, which I descended. And it was increasingly dark as I went down, but it was lit by a very dim magenta-like light. And that was pretty much all I could remember, so that's what I put in my notes. But then another person dreamed of being in a dimly lit round room with a staircase ascending from it, and a portal that led to another room, which is something I didn't see. But they went through the portal. And each person seemed to be providing another piece of this narrative. Now, honestly, I don't remember it all now. It was a pretty long time ago, and I've even tried to find Brad and the notes that we took from those days over the years, and I've never been able to find them. But it was really pretty incredible how it all strung together. And frankly, I think that's one of the tests of magical results, is if you get results that are not exactly what you expected.
Mm.
If you get exactly what you expected, you might be fooling yourself with confirmation bias. But if it's a little off in left field, but still gets the job done, that means you didn't just make it up.
Yeah. I want to stop there and just kind of note the way in which the idea of confirmation bias, which is an idea from cognitive science, and it's now gained quite a sort of spread through the world as a way of both criticizing your enemies and more helpfully questioning your own assumptions. And it's a piece of what we would have to call rationalism. This is not the my mystical inner voice told me, to that you're my future wife thing. This is the come on, man. I have some questions for that inner voice side of the equation. How much was that kind of skeptical thinking part of your approach, either individually or even in terms of the other folks in the autonomatrix, that part of what you were doing was constructing these intense experiences or creating the possibility for them, but also you're resisting certain kinds or aspects of supernatural thinking that almost inevitably come up when you start doing intense, weird stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we wanted, like you say, I wanted the spirits to speak to me and tell me something beyond, all you people on Earth should love each other and work together to preserve your planet. Yeah, I know all that. Tell me something I don't know. Surprise me. Because most of the people, they go into these channelers and these, because the new agey people like you talked about, they just want confirmation of what they already believe. And somehow the spirits always tell them exactly what they expected to hear the spirits say. We didn't want that. We wanted to throw ourselves off the cliff and say anything to us you want. Even if it's unintelligible, we'll take it.
Interesting. And then did you ever have any of your Cthulhu workings where you were a little concerned with either your sanity or what rules of reality you might have just broken? Where the deep fear strikes?
Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you about the time we pushed it as close to the edge as I can remember. It was a joint project of the Autonomatrix and Thelema Lodge, OTO, and it was called the Uranus Collective. And we performed this ritual at their lodge. Now, the night we all assembled to perform it, right before we began, there was a power failure. Whole street blacked out. Now, we were planning to use candles anyway, but now we were completely forced to do everything by candlelight. And we had also had a recorded track that we're going to play along with it, as background music. It was mostly a static drumming sound. But we had to go and get a boombox so that we could play that. Now, this was an invocation of Nyarlathotep and a summoning of a telepathic summoning of Cthulhu. The ritual involved first doing a summoning of Nyarlathotep, which somebody had basically kludged from voodoo, and the summonings for Papa Legba, and converted it into a Lovecraftian style, because Nyarlathotep is the messenger. You must go to him first if you want to communicate with the old ones. Then there was a opening of the gate of Yog-Sothoth, which was a variation on the same ritual we had done for the dream working. We even had a banishing ritual we called the Star Onyx, which was a summoning of the Lovecraftian old ones to the quarters. It was our own lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Then it involved playing the drumming music. Several of us had noisemakers and drums, and we were playing flutes. I had an ocarina. And walking around in random patterns, bumping into each other, hyperventilating, and speaking in tongues. The idea was to communicate with the crawling chaos at the center of the universe, Azathoth, who is depicted as being surrounded by dancers playing flutes infinitely. The chaos at the center of existence. You Lovecraft people know what I'm talking about. The goal was to create an unguent to use as a means for telepathic dreaming. Now, by the time we had worked all this and settled ourselves down into the working circle where we were going to prepare this as we chanted the famous Cthulhu passage from Lovecraft, we were going to make like an unguent, like a flying ointment. So smear it on your body and go to sleep. Now, I had ingredients like things like ashes, camphor, a mixture of dried blood and sperm, and a hair of a black dog, and a crushed beetle. We got a dried beetle at the old bone room. Remember that place?
Yeah.
After opening the gate and we were chanting the Cthulhu information, we put all the ingredients into a big mortar and crushed them. Now, this is a big beetle, about 4 inches long. And the sound of that beetle being crushed was one of the most sickening sounds I have ever heard in my life. One of the group got up, ran away, and threw up in a trash can. All of us were feeling hot and sweating, and there was like some horrible things floating over us. Some people were saying it was like a black mist was obscuring their vision in the room. We all ended up pretty traumatized. One woman was in a daze for several minutes, laying in front of the fireplace in Thelema Lodge, just like mumbling to herself and sweating. We had to talk her down. Now, so I think as far as doing ritual workings, that is the most intense Cthulhuoid thing that I ever did. Honestly, I still have that vial of unguent, my share of it. We all split it up. I've never used it. I'm actually kind of afraid to.
Yeah, that's it. Now, so what do you think? I mean, as part of, if you think about that ritual as part of your overall kind of magical career, which had, a lot of motivation, some discovery, some entertainment, some group collective experiments, some mystical, visions. It's all part of it. How do you think of how do you interpret that? Like a point where you were like, whoa, that was getting to a place where like people were actually being, could have been harmed, or it was a situation where, okay, we got to that edge. Like, how do you, what do you do with that? What do you do with a kind of experience like that afterwards?
Relish it and tell great stories about it for the rest of your life. I know I'm being facetious, but it's almost like the intensity of the experience is the reason to do it. It's almost like that old joke from Marlon Brando in The Wild Ones. What are you rebelling against? What do you got?
Yeah.
The doing of it is the goal. I think Phil Hine even put it this way: it's almost like a test of your strength and bravery. Do you dare do this? Because if you do and you can get through it, there's a whole lot more you might be capable of that you didn't think you could do. I remember that one of the rituals we did in the Automatrix in Temple Babel was called for drawing blood. I mean, just a little bit, just poke your, like you would. I think we even had needles that diabetics use to test their blood sugar, because you had to put a drop of blood on a sigil and another drop on your forehead. But there was one member who was deathly afraid of needles, and he just couldn't quite bring himself to stick himself in the thumb. It really was a battle for him to overcome that fear and do it. But he told us later he was no longer afraid of it. So there's a result you can get right there. You no longer have to fear this anymore. You've confronted it. It's a very, it's basically the, phobia therapy for psychologists. This is exactly what they do. You're afraid of flying? Stick them in a plane. Make them fly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's reminding me of is in the lore of the Suicide Club, which is the San Francisco club that preceded the Cacophony Society, which is partly what led to Burning Man, et cetera, that they also like to do things that were just extremely uncomfortable or frightening. And they didn't have any sort of, kind of spiritual language about it, or a little bit, I would say, but not overtly. But it was the same kind of idea of like, for some people, like the idea of being naked in public was the most terrifying thing in the world. So that when they did like streaking on the cable cars, for some people it was just a gas, but for some people it was an initiation. And one of the things I'm drawing from what you're saying is that if you develop a spiritual sensitivity or spiritual sensibility that recognizes that intensity is a good, that it's valuable to face intensity, that also helps you face fear. because anytime you're dealing with fear, you're in intensity. And if you can learn to appreciate and work with intensity, then you suddenly have a very different way of dealing with your fears rather than letting them rule you.
In fact, that was part of the initiation process we developed for the Autonomatrix. Every candidate had to basically compose their own initiation ritual. So there was no standard initiation ritual into the guild. Everyone had their own personal one. And they worked with a mentor in the guild that would help and guide them and advise them and edit their work and stuff until they agreed that this is the ritual we're going to do. But one of the things that was insisted on is you had to come up with something that was a fear in your life and incorporate that into your ritual. So we had people who, one person, we took her to the beach and buried her alive with nothing but straws to breathe through. And she had to remain there while people, we stomped on the ground around her and screamed threatening things that we were going to do to her until she finally couldn't stand it anymore and she would burst out of her grave. And there's another one where it was afraid of the sight of blood. So we had her, she had to draw blood from another member of the group. And one of the members volunteered. And so she very hesitantly took that X-Acto knife, and she was just supposed to just do a little bit of a cut in his thumb pad or his palm. She ended up pushing too hard and practically cut an artery. We had to take him to the ER. Now that was a real initiation for her.
I'll say.
There's another one where she wanted the candidate wanted to dose herself with magic mushrooms and be set loose in a graveyard, and she had to find her way back to the car where we first met.
Wow.
Alone. Although we actually, not telling her, we had someone following her around at a distance to make sure she was okay.
Yeah. Well played. Well played. All of those are definitely striking, and I think it helps, because part of what I'm trying to figure out to do here is to sort of show the different dimensions of the chaos magic and the sort of intense dark side work that's not what it looks like necessarily from the outside. And that also applies to joyous celebration in the sense that chaos magic, especially in the Bay Area, it sounds like, and as well as other places, definitely in the UK, was part of the rave scene as well. Like you guys this was the time of like peak rave weirdness, sort of psychedelic return. And how did your work and chaos magic sort of play into that scene that was happening also in the early mid-90s?
Well, I mean, I'd gotten into, mostly because I'm an audio engineer by profession, and I was helping out with some of the audio stuff for some of the raves in San Francisco. And I met a fellow named Mark Healy, who was a British guy who came to San Francisco from the rave scene in England to establish it here. And they ran the Toontown raves, which if you were around in the 90s, you saw their posters. Now, Michael was also a pretty spiritual guy, and he saw that dimension to what was going on and wanted to harness it. And so when we started getting to know each other and talking about it, he wanted to do a magical rave called Orgasm. And this was at the old King Street club behind the Townsend in San Francisco. And so he set up, an altar. You walked in the place, there was an altar there. And people were encouraged to bring their own tchotchkes to place on the altar. And he wanted us to open the rave with a ritual, which we did. We did a thing called the opening a vortex, which is like opening an energy vortex in the middle of a working space. So I brought in my ceremonial sword. I did a circle casting about it, and then we opened up the vortex in the middle of the dance floor. People who were there at first were just kind of, some of them were really into it. Others were like, I came here to take ecstasy and dance. But we noticed that after they got the music going and everything was happening, that area that we opened the vortex in, the dancers avoided it. It was like this empty 10-foot wide spot in the middle of the dance floor that nobody went into. Not even people who weren't even there when we started it. Somehow they all just avoided it. I remember standing up on the balcony with my fellow chaos magicians, looking down and going, wow, look, they're avoiding the vortex. Now, we saw that as a way, hey, they're doing ecstasy, and they're all in the thing, and there's all this spiritual dimension to it that was not so present in punk rock. So maybe there's something there, and Michael really wanted to shove it in that direction, but frankly, it just didn't work.
Interesting. Why do you think it didn't work?
Because there were too many people who were just there to dance and take ecstasy. That was what they're there for. They didn't really care. Now, the early ravers, just like the early punks, had a lot more thought put into what they were doing. Then it became popular. Then come the tourists. And
it does seem to be an inevitable law of subculture, repeated over and over again. Machine. Although I don't know how many. Do you think there's a lot of tourists in chaos magic these days?
Oh, sure. Now it's kind of evolved into some kind of like eclectic witchcraft with leather jackets and spikes. The same kids that used to walk around calling themselves warlocks and had upside-down pentagrams on the backs of their leather jackets are now have chaos stars, and they call themselves chaos. To me, that's not what chaos magic was in the beginning or what I think it still is. It was actually kind of definitely defined in at least more definitely defined. It wasn't just, do whatever the hell you want. It was more like a mixture of Austin Spare's sigil magic and his whole Zosky occultist practices. Some Thelemic ideas of true will and aeonic history, but really with no mention of Crowley or holy books or anything like that. And then sprinkled liberally with Taoism and ecstatic shamanism. That's chaos magic.
That was very well described, and it also kind of represents the way that the chaos current was both looking back, like recognizing sources of witchcraft and sorcery, but also very much anticipating shifts that were happening in spirituality, like an opening towards shamanism, which now we see in all sorts of facets and features, as well as its nod to the East, which is there in some other currents. Some other Thelemic currents will find itself connecting with aspects of Hinduism, but the connection to Taoism always seemed really profound, partly through Robert Anton Wilson, who was a really important influence on Peter Carroll back in the day, and that's a really interesting connection there too.
And Burroughs and Timothy Leary too. I think Taoism worked better as an Eastern influence because, unlike Buddhism, it doesn't have this passivity to it. Shaolin monks are Taoists. Okay, Taoists aren't passive. They are moving. In fact, that's the whole idea of Taoism is motion, and so that was a better fit into what, like Peter Carroll and Ray Sherwin and Phil Hine and all those people were developing in England back in the late 80s.
Yeah, that makes sense. We got about 8 minutes left here, and since our current era, some of the most powerful magical forces remain the forces of capitalism, unfortunately. I wanted to ask you about one event you guys did, which was this Jupiter invocation at the Pacific Stock Exchange. I don't know anything about that, so I'd love to just hear that story.
Oh, that was fun. That was when Mark Healy and I came up with that one, the rave promoter. We thought that and I think it evolved because, hey, finances are always an issue when you're a promoter. You want to make sure that you can raise the money and, be able to keep renting the venues and keep doing all this stuff. So and it wasn't we were trying to do some rejection of capitalism or anything. We were trying to suck more wealth into our projects. So it was kind of the opposite of that sensibility. But it was fun. We have a rite of Jupiter in the Ax Corpus, and it involves summoning Jupiter to draw wealth. So we decided it'd be a good idea to do this in a public way, and where is a better place than to do it at a temple of wealth, the stock exchange. Now, in those days, that place was an active exchange. I mean, it was, I think in later years, they just kind of closed it. There's no, traders don't go there to the trading floor anymore. It's all done online. But in those days, it was like bankers and stock traders in white shirts and ties going in and out of the place. And so we performed it on the steps outside. And the first thing we did, it was like the base of the steps, and we took a black, or was it black or blue rope, and wrapped it in a circle to define our working space. And it involved shaking a big money bag full of coins to the four quarters, and we're talking like a big cloth Scrooge McDuckian bag with a dollar sign on it. and we made everything big because we have big movements because it's when it's a public ritual outside. We chanted in barbarous tongues and summoned money to come to us, and a small crowd was kind of watching with interested, puzzled stares on their faces, or what are these guys doing? No one called the cops on us. And then, looking back, thinking about it, it only was maybe 15 minutes long. It was like what they call now a flash mob kind of thing. We just showed up, did it, and melted away. As far as any results go, actually, within a few weeks, I got a pretty lucrative audio engineer gig shortly after that. So I can count that one as a successful working.
Well played. So again, with our few minutes left here, so you already kind of alluded to some of the sense you have about how chaos magic has become whatever, a brand, a logo you can put on the back of your shirt. But opening up a little bit wider, where do you think the sort of current or currents of contemporary magical practice and experience are right now? Like, on the one hand, it's very visible. It's all over the internet. There's all this sort of teenage witchcraft. There's all this sort of images in pop culture. There's a broader discussion about the occult. But how do you feel, as somebody who was really, in the trenches, so to speak, about how this moment we're in now compares with the earlier spaces that you were participating in?
Well, what I think has happened, in that, over the last 10 years or so, is that the attitude of chaos magic has kind of seeped its way into all these other occult movements. I started working with the Golden Dawn Order, as you know, that's where we met. And I tried to infuse some of this, excitement and challenge and intensity into what we were doing with that group. And that's in trying, wow, what a study in opposites that is. I was also there personally because I wanted to, it's kind of like a rock guitar player who decided to go to Juilliard and see what they could teach me. But I think also we might be right on the edge of something, another thing like chaos magic exploding again, because we're starting to see it in the young generation. I mean, if you've been watching all the things about, the kids now with the March for Our Lives and all the things that have been happening just now, that kind of energy of challenge of, I don't want to hear your bullshit anymore. We're going to do this our way, and we're going to make it rock. That, you know how society's attitudes often filter into whatever mystical and occult practices and traditions happen to come to the fore at a particular point in time. I think these young kids might take what we did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and reimagine it for themselves. And we might see something that we might, through a glass darkly, kind of see chaos magic in the distance of what they're doing. But we can't tell them what to do. They're going to do their thing, and we should just get out of their way and let them do it.
Well, I love what you're saying there, and I agree with you that the world is so there's so many possibilities for significant change as well as significant chaos in the bad sense of chaos. And, up till recently, I would tend to be more negative about looking at the results of the kind of mainstreaming influence of chaos magic, in the sense that a lot of the alt-right meme magic that was going on around the election is really aspects of chaos magic taken in a very dark direction, sometimes quite consciously from an occult perspective. Some of those guys were very, very into sort of, neo-Nazi occultism and sort of using these sort of chaos pranks, if you will, in a very diabolical way politically, I would say. But now things feel different to me. Now it actually feels like the whole thing is up for grabs. There's a lot of really positive things that are possibly occurring as well.
I think so too. I mean, remember, the whole idea of chaos magic is not to just, invoke chaos for fun. It's fun. It's supposed to be fun. If it's not fun, you're doing it wrong. You study magic because you enjoy it. Just like a guitar player practices their instrument because they love the music. It's a lot of work. It makes your fingers bleed. It's intense, but you love it. It's just something you have to do. And the idea of chaos magic is not to be overwhelmed by chaos, but to grab a hold of it, jump on its back, and ride it.
Excellent, man. I think we're going to have to end it right there. Joe, this was a total treat. I'm so thanks for pulling out the war stories. Thanks so much for being on the show.
You're so welcome, Erik. I'm just glad to be here.
Excellent. All right, folks. Until next week, keep your minds open.